Thank you. Right, so a quick disclaimer, 11:30 a.m. today, I got a message, oh, Leo has something prepared, and I'm like, what? On Slack? Oh, because one of the engineers couldn't come today, so I'm covering him, and I always have a talk, as I to say, so there we go. So I gave this talk here a few, maybe 7 months ago internally, so I prepared you guys. I think Alex was going to talk about ESLint. It's not ESLint, but it's quite related, so if you were interested in this talk, maybe I can cover from that. So the talk was actually, instead of parsing coded Babel, is parsing feature flags, which was a long journey of a simple task that I had to do. So if you're not familiar with feature flag term, it's kind of like A/B testing. So for example, in Jira and many other products that we have at Atlassian, we can have some features as experiment, and you can enable for one user or multiple users or random and stuff like that. So that's what we use here to enable feature or to refactor code and doing stuff less safe because we have a continuous delivery, right? Every PR we do goes straight to cloud. So if you have a bug, you're gonna be upset, so we can switch off if something happens. So that's kind of like we use this here. So to do that, we write some JavaScript code. That's a JavaScript meetup. So to do that, we have this function that called, can you see my cursor? Code, get Boolean feature flag. And sometimes instead of Boolean, instead of Boolean could be a string. And then we have this utility that does some fetching and stuff like that, parsing. So to do that, what we want to do is we want to automate our mocking tools, right? Because we have all these experiments. We want to make sure that everybody's writing tests for the new experiment. Instead of doing the after the experiment is done, they're gonna fix up and clean up the old code. What's been happening for a while is people like, oh, I didn't write tests for this. So what we did is we wrote some code to automate, and every time you push a new flag, a new experiment, we make sure that this flag is already enabled. So if it's something that you're not touching breaks, our pipeline will say, hey, you forgot to write tests for that. So this is quite interesting. So the code we write is, for example, like this, people write is enabled, and then you get Boolean, and then you can have a default value, for example, false, or you can set any default value. In this case here, the sucks button, the designer decided to be blue, so that's kind of like a mock-up for. So yeah, that was the request. I kind of already said that. So one of the engineers said, oh, why don't we start to make this code and make it automated for our tests, right? So the idea was to manually write this. So each PR will say, oh, I'm enabled the flag bool and bar, so let's create this big array here, and in this case, an object that have the flag name and the default value, right? So use GPT false, for example, maybe, yeah. And some flags can be Boolean, sometimes can be a string, or it can even have some crazy variations like beta or region, depends on what you need, okay? So instead of doing a manual and make sure that the code reviewer will remember, hey, you forgot to add your test there. Another engineer, which is more even clever, said, why don't you automate that? And I was like, that's kind of like an interesting. I could just take this ticket and assign to me because it sounds quite interesting. So I did a very quick search how many features we have in a single file, and that was pretty much 106 at the time. Today we might have 200, I don't know. But that was the time that I wrote that was 106. Quite interesting. And I was like, well, that's quite simple. Just write some regular expression and I can go for it, right? So I just need to make sure that if a variable is Boolean, I'll just make sure it works. I just don't care about multivariation because I don't have time for that. And also I'll make sure that the Webpack caches for me because I don't need to worry about that as well. Yeah, so chapter 1. So the regular expression are very hard to use and maintain. Are you guys familiar with regular expression? Can you write one? Because I'm horrible at that. So yeah, I'll say this task could take me 2 hours. I just go to Stack Overflow. Well, at the time, GPT was not a thing. Today, I'll probably go to ChatGPT. But regular expression, I just copy and paste. And voila, it doesn't work, right? I mean, it works for the function, but if I want to use ES6 style const, it doesn't work. Well, that's fine. I'll just find a better regular expression that might work for me, right? Sure. Oh, in my variation, it just doesn't work. And I have no idea what is happening here. What does this mean? I can't read this, man. I'm not ChatGPT. So chapter 2, well, if you want to parse the code, you don't use a regular expression. Please don't. Use a parser, okay? So welcome to Babel. I've never done before. I'm not a compiler geek. So that was my first learning using Babel, and I'll tell you how challenging that was. So I guess it will be 3 hours work. Stupid I was. So I had to learn something about the AST. I'm like, what does that mean? Abstract syntax tree. So you might be familiar with some DOM tree, probably, I guess, if you've never done AST. They're quite similar. A similar pattern. I actually think DOM might be AST, but anyway, I'm not a guru. So yeah, you have a function, and then the function might have some statements and return statement. You might have some binary operation. You might have a block or not. You might have a variable, assignment, a lot of things. It's quite complicated. So instead of doing that all by yourself, because you might not be crazy, there is some pretty cool engineer who wrote this tool called AST Explorer. What you do is pretty much copy and paste the code. I hope it's big enough, but I'll read it loud here. It's a const flag, and I create a very quick error function that uses my get boolean flag. And with that, I have some string, and the next parameter is a boolean. So you can see here very clear how is the tree. So that means that I have a body, and the body has a variable declaration because this is a const. And then the variable declaration is a type, and I have an identifier, and this can be quite complex. So I'm just gonna highlight the things that matter for mine. So what matters for me was the name of the constant, because if you are using this function, matters to me. If you're not, I don't care. And also I want to care about 2 arguments, the value and the type. So if the value is a boolean, I'll make sure that I'll default to a boolean. And if it's a string, I'll default to a string and so on, right? So cool, that's quite easy. I just have this big JSON, just go dot and find what I need, right? Cool, I'll just get a declarations, that string, that's the boolean, and I have it here, 5-6 lines of code, and cool, let's go for it. Let's test this out. The problem is that we have too many devs here. We have maybe 1,000 engineers working in Jira, probably, and no one writes code the same as the other one. I wish they would, but we don't. So let's see some variations here. Somebody likes to do a dry, don't repeat yourself. So they create a constant, and they can use the, remember the little AST that I told you? Well, if you actually put a constant, that's no longer a string, so it's a variable declaration, that is a constant. I'll have to find another solution for that. What if I use TypeScript or Flow, because we used to use Flow, but now TypeScript. Well, I have a different tree, and then you probably go from there, what's happening to me, right? Sometimes I have a comment. I have to ignore a comment. I don't care about comment. They probably should be deleted in the codes anyway. And then sometimes you have some crazy stuff that I don't understand, like why I have some workaround that works. Probably he copied from Stack Overflow. But that's what happens, right? So my little tasks start getting harder and harder. So first, I have to build it, and then I go to Babel. From Babel, I go to Webpack and Cursor. Oh, I forgot all about that when I was writing this. So, well, I don't need to write unit tests, but it works for me, so let's try this in the pipeline. It's breaking. Why? Because we use Babel, and Babel doesn't like this. He changed to 0, get feature flag, and string it. I don't know what that means. Okay, so now I fixed that code. I just add some more line of codes, and beautiful. Oh, now it's breaking on the storybook, because the Webpack works, but storybook has a in dev memory, so the Webpack server is different than Webpack production, and my code is a little different. So instead of using this 0, I have this string now, which is an array, and I have the parameter, and then my tree is getting harder and harder to maintain. No worries, I'll get the Webpack, and Uglify. What is Uglify or Terser, if you don't know? We have this term called Mango. I don't even know what that means, but Mango is, we change any function name and we make them very small, so our code is JavaScript when we want to download it for mobile is very small. So instead of saying get feature flag value, it's A or B or C, and sometimes I can't. Have you tried read the compile code in Uglify? If you can, wow, you are magic. I can't do that. But I had to fix all my codes, and you probably see that my line of 5 codes went to maybe 120. I don't want you to read this because it's pretty much not dot 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 if dot 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 if dot dot. That was pretty much what happened. So what I was trying to say is that every time you have to parse some code or write code mods, which are pretty much when you transfer a code from A to B, you transpile. You probably, if you are a compiler writer, you probably is a ninja guru, man. Because I really, really, really think they were amazing. Because, well, I pushed the code and now my pipeline is broken because the code coverage that only happens in master is doing some crazy shit. So I'm done and I don't want to do any parser anymore. Any questions?